Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Wednesday, February 5th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Coming up, among the flurry of early executive actions taken by President Trump was the suspension of a program that resettles refugees in the U.S.
Refugees and folks with SIV status from Afghanistan are coming with visas that are the most regulated and stringent out of every single visa that there is.
A local nonprofit director explains why that funding should continue to flow. That's coming up later in the episode. But first, today's headlines. The first phase of the California high-speed rail project is facing yet more delays. A report by the state's inspector general says it's now, quote, unlikely the first phase will be completed by 2033. That phase comprises a segment of the rail line from Merced to Bakersfield. The project has already been pushed back from earlier dates multiple times. The original date when trains would be up and running was 2020. The report states that delays are due to continued disagreements with third parties as construction continues. The California State Assembly is supporting a $50 million fund to defend progressive policies. A bill to create the fund comes as the state prepares many challenges to the new Trump administration. Half of the funds would be used by the state's Department of Justice in legal challenges against the federal government. The other half would be used to aid legal groups who defend immigrants facing deportation. The state Senate approved the funding last month. The funding proposal will require a signature from Governor Newsom. Democratic legislators are introducing two new bills to expand tax credits for Californians with low incomes. One from Los Angeles Democratic Assemblymember Mark Gonzalez would gradually raise the age for the Young Child Tax Credit.
No child should ever have to grow up in poverty, worried about whether or not there's enough money to put food on their table, having to do homework and after-school activities. I myself had to worry about that.
Another from first-term Silicon Valley Democratic Assemblymember Patrick Ahrens would set the minimum at $300.
I know as a freshman, increasing that is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy in normal budget times, let alone what is happening here.
With Los Angeles fire recovery and the cuts President Trump has threatened to federal funding, California could have a tighter budget than it previously planned for this year. And finally, the results of the latest Western monarch butterfly count reveals a steep decline in the population. Cap Radio's Manola Sakita has the details.
Last year, counters reported over 230,000 monarchs, but in the latest report, that number sank to 9,119. This reflects a decades-long decline for the population. It's also the second lowest number recorded since the Western monarch butterfly count first started in the 90s. Emma Pelton is a conservation biologist for the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation, which organizes the count.
This year was a little bit of the wake-up call that we are not on the path to recovery like we had kind of hoped with the past couple of years.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is seeking public comment on a proposed rule to list the monarch butterfly as a threatened species. The final decision to list the insect under the Endangered Species Act could be announced in December. Pelton says this status would help bring more funding to conservation efforts. In Sacramento, I'm Manola Sakita.
Support for Central Valley Daily comes from the members of KVPR. Join at $8 or more per month and access ad-free NPR podcasts through NPR Plus. Give now at kvpr.org/donate.
And now to our main story. Last month, President Donald Trump came back into office ready to reshape much of the country's immigration laws. He curtailed the asylum process at the southern U.S. border by shutting down an app used to make court appointments. Trump also issued new orders expanding the powers of immigration agents to arrest immigrants without legal status. And another target of the new administration is refugees. An executive order issued last month suspended the Refugee Admissions Program. That's a program that identifies and admits refugees into the country. The order was immediately felt across the country and the world. I recently sat down with Christine Barker. She's the executive director of the Fresno Immigrant and Refugee Ministries. The agency supports refugees who choose to resettle in the Fresno area from countries that include Syria, Myanmar, Armenia, and Nicaragua. Christine starts out by telling us of the immediate effects of the program's suspension.
We had 8 flights canceled that were supposed to come last week and this week, and those flights have been canceled with no timeline on when they might be rescheduled. And then we also found out on Sunday night that we were ordered to stop all work for refugees who are already here. And that was a stop work order issued by the Department of State. The stop work order puts an immediate pause on about 15% of our budget in a given year. There are a lot of questions about how that stop work order is supposed to happen and what counts as an eligible expense. And we are still seeking clarification from every means possible as to what the federal government expects us to do with refugees who are here, who reasonably expect the core services to be provided to them that were promised to them before they left wherever they were before they came here.
Okay, this sounds like a monumental shift. Has anything like this happened before in your tenure at firm?
Definitely not in my tenure at firm, and definitely not in anyone that I've talked to's memory in terms of refugee resettlement. Although there was a travel ban with the first Trump administration that was limited to specific countries of origin and later determined to be illegal. There was a pause in refugee admissions, which was later restarted under the first Trump administration, but no one has ever even heard about the idea of a blanket stop work order being given out to everyone who receives funding through Department of State.
Can you give us an example of what type of preparation is usually needed to assist a family who's resettling in the U.S. or specifically in a place like Fresno?
So for many of the families that are coming to Fresno, they're coming here because they already know someone. It could be a relative, it could be a friend, and that person has agreed to help welcome them, which is why they are coming to Fresno specifically. And so the very first step is we would reach out to the U.S. tie and say, hey, we hear this person's coming. What kind of support are you able to provide, and what kind of support would be most helpful for us to provide in order to make sure this goes as smoothly as possible? And then depending on what the U.S. tie is able to provide, we kind of fill in using volunteers and community support and the limited federal funds available to us to make sure that every person has what they need to get started in the U.S.
What have been some of the stories from these refugees that have stuck with you?
Oh, man, so many. I think one of the stories that has stuck with me for a long time was a Syrian family that came a little over a year ago. Their U.S. tie was their sister, and it turns out that their sister is someone that firm had helped in 2016 and 2017. And so by the time this sister came to Fresno, the sister who was already here had already become a citizen. There were babies they had never met except for over FaceTime. There were so many life updates that were eagerly kind of shared. And, oh, wow, this is how tall you are, as the families were reuniting at the airport and cousins were bringing stuffed animals. It sticks with me because it was such a beautiful experience of safe travel options for families to be reunited.
How expensive is it to run firm? And do you think your organization has enough resources to keep operating?
So this program from the start has been a public-private partnership. So since the U.S. made the policies in 1975 and refined them in 1980, everyone involved has always known that federal government support is not enough for what refugees need. And so there are a staff of about 8 individuals who work at firm to welcome, up until now, typically between 20 and 30 people a month, which is 5 to 7 families, depending on family size. With each one, make sure they're in stable housing that's safe, make sure they know how to navigate the resources available to them, make sure they're connected to healthcare, to screenings, to medication, make sure the kids are in school, make sure the adults are enrolled in ESL. and connected to folks at county and know what it takes to get a job and find work and pay your bills in America.
Trump has signaled he's taking a much more hardline stance against immigration than his predecessors, and a lot of Americans support moves to limit the number of immigrants coming to the U.S. Can you make a case for why your program should keep supporting refugees coming here into the country?
We know that refugees and folks with SIV status from Afghanistan are coming with visas that are the most regulated and stringent out of every single visa that there is. We know, because of research and because of the stories that we have heard over the years, that each refugee that starts over here contributes so much to our community, to our society, to our economy, and that math plays out time and time and time again. We also know that Fresno is a great place to start, especially compared to other parts of California that might be more expensive. And I know that my life is irrevocably better because of the refugees who I've been privileged enough to know and hear their stories and learn from over the years. And I think many of us can think of people who came because they were fleeing persecution or death, and we have been lucky enough to know and have part of our community here.
What is FIRM able to do right now under this current federal program suspension, and how are families responding?
We are unable at the moment to use federal funds to help the families who are already here. We are, however, committed to our mission and committed to our staff and to the refugee and immigrant communities that make Fresno home. And so we are seeking the support of community in order to keep paying the bills that need to be paid, in order to make sure everyone gets the core services that they need in order to start. We have other funding sources that we are seeking to use in order to continue continuity of services, and we are eager for clarification from the federal government as to how they expect this to play out.
Okay, that was Christine Barker, Executive Director of FIRM, Fresno Immigrant and Refugee Ministries. Christine, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Carrie Klein and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
Each morning, it's a new opportunity, a chance to start fresh. Up First from NPR makes each morning an opportunity to learn and to understand. Choose to join the world every morning with Up First, a podcast that hands you everything going on across the globe and down the street, all in 15 minutes or less. Start your day informed and anew with Up First by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts.